Hey there, welcome to this video. Thank you for tuning in. My name is Brendan, and today I'm going to be interviewing Anna Marsh, who is a functional medicine nutritional therapist and somatic experiencing practitioner. Anna, I'm very fortunate to have the pleasure of working with in my fundamentals program with my coaching clients, but also Anna has been very helpful for coaching my wife when she previously focused on women's health and nutrition and weight loss. Anna has over 15 years of experience as a healthcare practitioner. She holds a master's degree in personalized nutrition and is a certified practitioner with the Institute of Functional Medicine and Somatic Experiencing Practitioner. She holds like loads of certifications. I can't even begin to tell you how many courses and things she's been on, but also how many people she's been helping, specifically in the region of chronic fatigue syndrome, ME, and dealing with her own bouts of chronic fatigue and ME, mold illness, SIBO, and parasites. We're going to cover it all in the conversation today, but I just wanted to give you a background. Anna has a podcast which she runs religiously, more religiously than I do with this podcast, and you can find her on Spotify and all the major platforms if you search Anna Marsh, or for the Chronic Fatigue Recovery and Burnout podcast, you will find her there. I was very grateful to spend an hour and a half with her on this chat, and I hope that you enjoy it as well. So thank you, Anna, for taking the time out to spend with us today on this little project. It's really cool to have you on the other side of the microphone, in the sense of not asking the questions, but being asked the questions. I think I listen to your podcast, not an avid listener, I have to say. I'll put my hands up in the air. But if there's a topic that you do on your podcast, I will often dive in and listen. And I found it very helpful. Obviously, we've spoken on your podcast, and I've spoken to you once before. I think you were working on another project at the time, which was cool. So I feel like it's heavily weighted in the favor of you know more about me than I know about you. So let's find out a little bit more about you. So apart from being from South Africa, can you give us a bit of background as to how did you end up in the UK? And that's where I want to start, because that's the interesting one.
Yeah, well, oh gosh, this is always such a difficult thing to answer because I'm like, how much time have you got? Where can we begin? It's feel like I've got a lot to say because I think there are some things that happened in my childhood which kind of then played out to influence probably that transition to the UK. So where I'll probably start is by saying that when I was 9 years old, I had unexplained fatigue. And in hindsight, knowing what I know now, I think there was a very big part of that which was emotional,
Okay.
perhaps all of it which was emotional, who knows. But at the time, I was diagnosed with nephritis, which is inflammation of the kidneys. And
Right.
the doctor at the time said you need to go on a high carbohydrate diet to keep your energy levels up. And
Okay.
my parents had just been divorced at the time. My mom was a single mom, and she was just doing her best. And I was given Magnums, potato crisps, yeah, all sorts of not very healthy foods to keep my energy levels up.
Okay.
And as a result, I think I gained like 2 stone in a very short space of time as a 9-year-old child. I was like
Gosh.
working kilos in South Africa. So I was like 35 kilos, went up to 50 kilos, grew boobs, went through puberty, and just, life was kind of never the same again. And eventually I kind of got my energy levels back and I went back to school and all of those types of things. But it definitely shaped my interest in nutrition from a very young age, because I went through this so many changes at once. My parents were getting divorced. I had this fatigue syndrome. I was taken out of school. My body changed. I went through puberty. It was a huge amount of different things that were all happening at once in my life. And I guess I just became really interested in health, and I became really interested in nutrition, and I became interested in not only from a dieting perspective, although probably in my younger years, there was that kind of element of like body image and weight loss, but also on health and how food impacts our health, not just our weight. So
Mm.
that
Wow.
was a really big shaping thing that shaped me from a very young age. And I know this has not answered your question yet, but I'm getting there. And so one of the things that I eventually did was I went to university in South Africa and I studied human kinetics and ergonomics and biochemistry.
Wow.
And I had always wanted to study nutrition, but there's not a lot of opportunities, or at least there weren't a lot of opportunities. It's probably changed now to do nutrition in South Africa unless you wanted to become a dietitian. And I did get accepted to do dietetics at the University of Stellenbosch, and I turned it down because I think now I'm so grateful that I did, but like gut instinct just said, no, this is not for you. So I chose the human kinetics and biochemistry route as like an alternative path. So I would still have a
Okay.
lot of the foundations of human physiology and human biochemistry before if I wanted to study nutrition in the future. And so that's how I ended up in the UK. Is I was
Right.
finishing my degree at Rhodes University, and I had an emergency appendectomy. So my appendix was taken out. And I was
Right.
bedbound for a week, lying in bed, couldn't do anything, thinking about my future and my life and what I was going to do next. And I got on Google and just started Googling stuff. And I found a degree here in the UK. And when I read the prospectus, I was like, this is it. This is what I want to do. And I think when you're young and naive, you just jump through all the hoops to make it happen, and you take those risks and you take those leaps of faith. And yeah, I found myself on a plane to the UK to study a degree in nutritional therapy, which is a very different approach to dietetics. And that was through the University of Middlesex in the UK.
Wow. That's quite something. I mean, so at that point, had you lost the weight that you'd gained when you were younger?
Yeah, so I guess that kind of brings on the training component of things, was that I've always loved swimming. And
Okay.
my dad says I learned to swim before I learned how to walk. So I've always loved swimming, and obviously, you know what it's like in South Africa and in Zimbabwe is, there's swimming pools, outdoor pools. You're always in and out of the pool at friends' houses swimming. So very
Yeah.
swimming lifestyle. And I was 13, and I was doing just like random swimming lessons at school, and there was a substitute teacher who kind of noticed me, and she said, Anna, you're quite a good swimmer. Maybe you should try out for the swim team.
Cool.
And I was like, okay. And we had a mutual friend. It was like a friend of my sister's who was in her year, so a couple of years older, but also my friend who was in the swim team. And she was sort of encouraged me, and she's like, yes, you should do this. And I had never been a sporty child because I was overweight and didn't, not that comfortable in my body, but I loved to swim. So she encouraged me to join the swim team. And then I went into high school and I swam. That was my sport throughout the whole of high school. And alongside that, we did land training in the winter. So I used to do step aerobics classes and go
Right.
to the gym and lift weights, obviously little baby weights at that time. And that was what really that sort of transition. The swimming was what got me into sport, which is what got me into training, which is what got me into fitness. And then for my high school years and all of that, it was like, I would say, lean, normal, probably a little bit obsessive in some ways with dieting and exercise. But yeah, at that
Mm.
point in time, I had lost the weight. And then that was also the interest in studying sports science as well at university. And when I decided I was going to move to the UK to study nutrition, I did a personal training qualification so I could work in personal training while I did my degree as a flexible way to earn money while I was studying.
Ah, right. Okay. So that's what led you down that route there. Okay. I didn't know that. That's good information, actually. And I mean, for the record, I know we've been working together. So you've been part of my fundamental program, which is the sort of way that people can work with me online to understand functional patterns. So you've been part of that for a while, and probably should have screened you a bit better then and found out a bit more, like, where did you go with it? But so then the personal training thing, that's really interesting. I knew you had a background in training because you've worked with my wife, Kate. and Kate came to you when you were I say heavily focused on nutrition, I suppose. And
more from a weight loss side of things.
yeah, and I know that that was something she was like, I think a lot of women when they reach a certain age as well, they tend to come into this battle of like keeping weight down and then up and then down and then up and stuff. So it was great that she worked with you a couple of times, I think, to help herself, and it really helped her understand her body better, which was fantastic. And that's where our paths first crossed. So you came over, you did your nutritional therapy degree, and you're working presumably in, was it one gym or was it multiple gyms as a PT?
Yeah, so I worked in one gym for a length of time while I was doing my
Hmm.
nutrition studies. And then once I qualified, I was sort of titrating the personal training down and bringing the nutrition up. But then I did actually move at one point in time to a private studio, which also had like a consultation room for my nutritional therapy and then a small gym for my clients.
Okay.
And I did that. I mean, I moved to London in 2008. I finished my degree September 2009. And then I
Okay.
worked in that way between personal training and nutritional therapy up until 2014.
Right.
And then that's when I made the decision to move down to the South Coast. And at that point in time, took my business online. And then it became much more nutrition focused.
Hmm.
And
Okay.
maybe also
And
worth mentioning that I also got really involved in CrossFit at one point in time,
yeah, I was going to talk
when I
about
was
that. Yeah.
living in London. And, and then also much more into like hypertrophy bodybuilding training, not in the sense that I was ever like bodybuilder competing on stage or anything, but just that style of training.
Yeah, no, I get that. And that was going to be my next sort of segue. So you've done your training, you've moved online, which in 2014 was a good shout actually, because I remember,
Caught the wave at the
things,
right time.
yeah, it was a good time to get into it. And I remember looking at it myself, and at the time I was so new to personal training, I didn't actually know where to start with things. And in hindsight, if I'd carried on, I met a bunch of YouTubers at Body Power. Do you remember? Did you ever go to Body Power?
I never went to Body Power, but apparently it's where all
Yeah.
the cool kids went.
Yeah. So I went to see the cool kids after the first year of being a PT, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, there's so much fitness stuff." And it was just a lot of it was incongruent with how I see the fitness industry as from a personal journey now. But back then it was like, all these supplement companies and stuff, and then you had the bodybuilding realm and all that. And I met these guys, and a group of us only had a couple of hundred subscribers on YouTube. And a lot of them are still doing it today and making really good money out of it. And I stopped. I was like, I can't keep this up. I've got to make money and do my job. And they kept it going, and I wish I had a little bit, but I think it gave me a good experience for what I'm doing now, which is great. So
Yeah. And
yeah,
I think also like life has a plan as well. Like sometimes things are just not meant to be in certain ways for certain reasons.
yeah, timing is important. And I always felt like, and I don't know how you felt, because this is something that your approach to going through things is actually almost quite traditional in a sense. It's like university and things like that. When I did my personal training diploma in the UK, I just didn't have really much. I didn't know where I wanted to go with my career. It was either become a personal trainer or get into the golf coaching realm. And I couldn't really see how golf was going to take up in 2014, 2013 time, because of the amount of money that had lost, the game had lost in the sort of the 2008 crash and things like that. So I just put myself in the position. I was like, look, where I'm based, there's a lot of expenditure on personal health. So I'm going to focus my energy on helping people that way. And when I finished my diploma, I didn't really, it was a bit like having my driver's license. Like, that you can drive competently, but you still got to go out there and get the road experience. And I never felt like I could really shout about my expertise per se, up until I've started with functional patterns, really, because I feel like you have to give it some time to build up that knowledge base to become the sort of quote unquote expert. How did you find that with what you knew? I mean, you'd had quite a big background in studies. So how was that transition from studying it and then to applying it? Like, how did you find that process?
Do you mean from the nutrition or the training side of things?
Both.
Both.
So like, the
Well,
nutritional element first and then maybe the training, personal training side.
yeah, so I guess nutritionally, I think it's definitely the case is like you get your nutritional therapy license in air quotes, you license to practice, I guess, and then you really have to get experience. And when I first started working, I stayed in the safe zone, which was weight loss, because that felt like safe.
Mm,
And but then from working with people in the weight loss zone, what I realized is that they all had gut issues, they all had hormone issues, they all had all these other issues. So you can't just work in weight loss.
yeah.
But additionally, a lot of mental health challenges as well. And
Mm,
and the mindset around it, I think, is sometimes the hardest piece for people. And that's actually what got me interested in trauma as well, and more of the psychology side of things, which is a whole other tangent we could go on. But then it was actually my own experience with my own health, which has been the biggest driver in my learning. Because I always said, like, how could someone who already knew so much about the human body from so many different angles suddenly find themselves so unwell? And I think that, when you go down this kind of chronic illness niche, there's so much complexity and there's so much nuance, and there's no way you can even know about it, know everything that you need to know until you're literally like bathing in it and seeing loads of clients and all the nuance and all the different experiences they have. Very much similar experience to you. And
yeah.
even, what you're saying about shouting, about like your expertise. I just interviewed this morning, before I've been speaking with you, Dr. Sarah Myhill, who's been practicing medicine since before I was born. And I was just interviewing her on her latest book, which is on chronic fatigue syndrome. And you hear her talk about her work, and she is just incredible. So much
Right.
confidence because she's been doing this for years. And I
Mm,
think it just is that case of when you've seen enough people and you know what you do works, that's when you can
yeah.
really start, talking about it.
Definitely, definitely. And I definitely that's a perfect answer to that question. And I always found until I found working with the concepts of functional patterns, what I was doing was helping people become more mentally resilient against the challenges that they were facing. And structurally, it was kind of I'm helping them train and I'm helping them do stuff that they wouldn't do on their own. But as far as I saw their progress, I was like, I know there's something missing, is how I felt about the functional pattern side of things. And when I started relearning this stuff, I was like, oh, yes, that makes so much sense for so and so and so and so, because their shoulders in this way, or their body's in this position, or they're sitting at a chair in a chair all day at work, and they've got a lot of stress from a mental perspective with their job. So for me, it was like, I've done all this work in the trenches with people, and then now I'm like, oh, there's something else I've learned that's just kind of taken me over the edge of confidence and given me that really good experience. So, I mean, with what you said there, you'd sort of done all your studying, you got into the coaching business. What did a normal week look like for you in that position? So, you're training clients and then you're training yourself doing CrossFit, right?
Yeah, so I think it evolved over time. I guess when I was running my online business, so from 2014 onwards, it was like wake up in the morning, have a really, really strong cup of coffee, go to the gym, completely like kill myself, leave nothing behind kind of workouts. Come home, shower, eat, and then just like online, either, there's so many different aspects of running an online business, from the marketing to the client delivery, meetings, networking, so I could sometimes even like just be constantly like just in front of a screen for like 14 hours a day bar. stopping to eat and that type
Mm.
of thing. So it was very, very, very like hectic lifestyle, and also traveling a lot. I did a lot of additional training, and that often meant traveling to the US, and then jet lag. And yeah, I would say it was like a very, very stressful time. I guess, I don't know if you wanted me to talk a little bit about before I took the business online as well, or does that answer your
You can do,
question?
yeah. I mean, what was that like? It's
Yeah,
quite.
I mean, obviously in the early days when I was working and studying, that it was kind of also the same kind of craziness. You wake up and it's usually like split shifts. So you go in early, you have a break, and often I would like do some studying like in the middle of the day, and then like be back in the gym for like the evening shift, get home at 9 o'clock. I remember I would go to sleep, and I would wake up and like I wouldn't even have to make my bed because I would just have been so tired. I hadn't even moved. I just like wake up, get out of bed, and the bed is already made because just like I hadn't moved the whole night, just
Yeah.
completely passed out. But that was not sustainable at all.
Mm.
And it did also start to just wear me down. And I've just realized like I'm a sensitive soul. I can't be doing this like crazy lifestyle of waking up early, being busy all day, and then going to bed late and doing it all over again. So
Mm.
as time went on, I kind of reduced my hours. I then started doing more things for me, which was then going to like CrossFit classes in the evening, and training quite hard in that regard.
Mm. So it was like replacing one stress with another, maybe,
Yeah, it's a
without
different.
realizing it.
Yeah, I mean, I did like when I started CrossFit, it was like when it was almost still like underground in the UK, so it was 2011, and
Oh
there were
wow,
maybe
okay,
like
early days.
two. Yeah, I was like an early adopter. So
Yeah.
there's like only maybe 2 or 3 CrossFit gyms in London. Like nobody really knew what it was. Nobody knows why you're at the supermarket with chalk and dirt all over your knees, like
Yeah.
and it was just really wonderful in some ways, because it was like, I think coming over from South Africa, moving to a big city, it was kind of lonely. And then when I found CrossFit, I found a community of people who were
Mm.
like into the same stuff as me. And it was really great for my mental health, I think, just
Yeah.
having a sense of community. But yeah, it did start to wear my body down a lot.
Mhm. And so you're working, so you've done your sort of face-to-face stuff and you've tapered that off. You've gone into working online with people, but still doing long days, lots of travel. At
Hmm.
what point did you hit the chronic fatigue again? Because I take it up until this point, you've almost quote unquote rehabilitated yourself from the 9-year-old person,
Hmm.
gone through no energy shifts, maybe, I'm not sure, I haven't asked you, but seemingly a period of your life where everything's kind of cool. Yeah, we're fine. I'm in control of everything, and life's hectic. Chronic fatigue hits again. So talk to me about how that came about.
Yeah, so I think there's the year I moved to London was obviously a very stressful year, like big transition, new city, new place, sorting out all the life logistics, and then working, building up a new personal training business, and then studying. And so that year, I also did have a lot of fatigue and brain fog
Okay.
and just feeling really awful. And it kind of it it was like really bad at one point in time. I remember just like walking up the stairs at the gym I was working and just thinking like, how can I keep on doing this? But it was like once life started to stabilize more, then it was like gradually I had more and more energy and I was able to do more. And then, as you say, like just kind of living a normal life, so to speak. But I think
Mm.
we also normalize in society, we normalize things so much. Like we normalize like your digestion being a little bit off, or you normalize just waking up on a Sunday and just feeling exhausted and like you don't want to do anything. And I think
Mm.
there's probably still a lot of warning signs that are, you just sweep under the rug because life is busy.
Yeah.
And even with the CrossFit, like kind of not getting sick, but getting these little like colds every 6 weeks and like low immunity, like those types of things. So I think there was a lot of imbalance or dysfunction, shall we say, that was just being normalized because you just think that that's part of life. But it
Mm.
was when once I moved to down to the Southwest Coast and I started my online business, I kind of think of it, I always describe it as like circling the drain. So it's like
Right.
things, it's like the dominoes was starting to fall one at a time. And I
Gotcha.
wasn't picking them back up again fast enough to stop the process.
Okay.
And not for want of trying. Like I could tell something was wrong, and I was trying to the best of my ability to address things within the scope of what I could see at the time, but there were definitely blind spots.
Mm.
And then what eventually happened was it was kind of like up and down, like waxing and waning. I go through periods of feeling a little bit better and then periods of feeling a little bit worse. And then I decided to do a yoga teacher training. And so it was a really big deal because I needed to take a month out of my business that I probably never ever taken more than a week out of at any one time, and go to Sri Lanka, have a month off, and do this 200-hour yoga teacher training. And I did that. And I actually felt amazing during the training. And then
Mm.
I came back to my regular life, and my body was just like, that's it. No, no more.
Right.
Yeah, I just was no longer able to live the life that I had lived when I left the country.
Wow. So I have a couple of questions on that. What year is that?
So the beginning of the fatigue journey experience, whatever you want to call it, was beginning of 2019.
2019. Okay, cool. All right. So, and then up until that point, you've been doing, a good 5 years ish of training people, coaching people, nutritional coaching online, burning out
Yeah.
a little bit. What are your coping mechanisms during that time? Aside from the CrossFit and the training,
Yeah.
what are your things to say, right, okay, I'm tired, but I'm gonna do this to keep me going? What's in your
So I guess like I've always been someone who's prioritized sleep. So like for me, sleep is kind of non-negotiable. Obviously, as human beings, we often will, for whatever reason, not sleep well. But I always found I needed to get enough sleep and prioritize sleep. I used to do a lot of napping to make up for sleep loss when I was working like longer hours and stuff. But I think it was like when I talk about the circling the drain, as I was circling the drain, I was adding in more and more things to try and help me, but they were never enough. So I
mm,
obviously started doing less training, intensive training, more yoga, started meditation, journaling practices, like, those types of things. But I think that was what was so frustrating, is that the more I worked on myself, it's like the worse I felt, because, and I could speak a bit more about that, but I just think there was what was the things that really needed to be addressed weren't being addressed at the
and being
time.
addressed, yeah. And so you hit this fatigue, and then what happened? You just couldn't work.
Yeah, well, I worked the whole way through, but it was a struggle,
Okay.
and it was, I could do bits and pieces, but I couldn't do, like, I would never have been able to run the business that I'm running now. And it was, see a client for an hour, go and lie down for an hour, see a
Wow.
client for an hour, go and lie down for an hour, and then maybe, lie on the sofa for the afternoon watching TV and just hope that you wake up the next day and you feel better. Well,
Mhm.
not completely better, but that you feel better than what you did that day.
Okay. That's hectic in its own way, because then it becomes a cycle of you only have the energy for the things that are going to sustain you on a financial aspect, rather than
Absolutely.
things that give you any pleasure, or things
Yeah,
that
it's
maybe
like about
help.
survival.
Yeah, survival, right? Yeah, that's a good word. It's like struggling for a
Yeah.
word there. That's a fantastic word. And so what do you think? So you've talked about, I know you've talked about stuff on your podcast, but I'm going to bring it up in a second. Up until now, I'm hearing like overworked, stress, and lots of responsibility into figuring out coping mechanisms around that. You've mentioned on your podcast parasites, I'm not sure what else, but those two stuck out for me, mold in
Yeah.
particular, because I feel like this country, is like,
Is moldy.
it's moldy. And that's not being like really, I'm a Zimbabwean. We didn't, I don't think I ever really came into contact with black mold until I moved to this country. And even then I didn't understand it. And I have a funny story about that if you want to hear it, but I'll wait for you to answer your question. Uh, so mold and parasites, what led you to discovering that in the fatigue journey?
So, gosh, this is like a whole episode in itself, but I'll try to keep it succinct. So, like in my chronic fatigue journey, I obviously went through a stage of doing loads of different things, and we can talk more about that if it's interesting, but we don't have to. But there were like certain things that I was doing that were eventually starting to help. And
Okay.
then I started reading a book called Toxic by Dr. Neil Nathan, I love him. I think he's amazing. And I was like, this book will be nice for me to learn more so I can help my clients.
Yeah.
And I read this book and I was just like, I always thought that people who are moldy people are like really, really sick people. By this point in time, I could walk, I could do like a long hike. Like I would, if provided there weren't like lots of hills, like I could do like a long flat hike. I could work okay. Life was okay, but it wasn't great. It wasn't thriving. And so I didn't kind of think, oh, I'm a moldy person, because I thought the moldy people are like in a dark room and, can't tolerate light and, can't
Yeah,
walk up a
yeah.
flight of
Sorry,
stairs.
I
And I was
shouldn't
like,
be
those,
laughing, but that's just the way you say moldy people. It just makes me laugh.
well,
It's true.
they're
Yeah, I know what
moldy.
you mean. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I thought the moldy people are really ill people. And obviously there are people with mold who are really ill. But I didn't think that that would be an issue for me. But reading this book, I was just like, I'm just wondering if this is also me. And it's actually really easy to test for mold mycotoxins. Regeneris Labs is the provider here in the country, in the UK. They offer Mosaic Lab testing, which is the main testing company. And it's a bit of an investment. I think it was about £250 or so, but I ran my urine mycotoxins test and I came back with 3 positive mycotoxins in my urine.
Okay.
And I was like, and obviously that's maybe not nice news to receive, but when you've felt unwell for so long, when you feel like you've invested so much time and energy into your health, to have something that you can work on that's like tangible is actually a win.
Mm.
So I had done so much work already on myself, which was kind of like laying down the foundations, that really what I only needed to do was just like add in some binders, which help to bind the mycotoxins and then carry them out in your feces, and
Okay.
then do infrared sauna. So I
Cool.
started doing infrared saunas and taking binders. And as soon as I started doing that, and who knows if it was psychosomatic or not, I was finally able to start doing a little bit more in terms of like resistance training. And because up until that point, I'd only been able to walk.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that was really supportive in my journey.
Mm.
But it did take time. And then as part of that, I also did the parasite thing. I'd done gut testing before, and it's not really been, I'd done about 3 stool tests by that point in time. And there were sort of some parasites there, sometimes yes, sometimes no. But I ended up just doing a full moon cleanse, which is a specific protocol offered by Cellcore, which is a US based company, but you can access their products here in the UK. And they just have amazing products. Like when I worked with clients and we've just shifted their supplement regime to Cellcore supplements, it's just made such a difference to them. And so they've got this full moon parasite cleanse where you take a specific set of supplements intensively over the 5 days of the full moon. The idea being is that full moon is when the parasites reproduce, so they're a little bit more active in the gut. They're not necessarily hiding in biofilm, which is like a protective layer which they can sort of hide under, which means they're protected against antimicrobials or medications or detection or things like that. So full moon
Right.
comes out, activity gets a little bit more going, and then you take the antimicrobials and the binders and whatnot, and it helps to kind of get rid of them, including the eggs as well, which is really
Okay.
important. So I think I'm always just playing around with things because I'm just like, I've got nothing to lose. Let me try this, let me try that. And that's what helps me help my clients, is because I've had experience with trying different things. So I did these various parasite cleanses across several months. You have to do them every full moon. And that was just also like a thing which really helped to just every time, just like a little notch up, another little notch up, another little notch up.
Okay. I'm a very cynical person in my own
Mm.
mind. I'm also like one of these ones where if I see something and I'm like, I can get to experience something, I'm like, okay, cool. You don't have to convince me of anything. I hear a lot of parasite stuff from, reading into Paul Chek from the Czech Institute, and he does some testing stuff. Really interestingly, I did his primal pattern typing test. It was like a questionnaire in his book. Have you read How to Eat, Move and Be Healthy? No.
No.
So in that book, he has a questionnaire that you can do, and you can answer a whole series of questions and go through everything, and eventually it scores you. And I didn't score very highly on anything. I was kind of like middle zone for a long time. And then I retested a few years later and I was like way up on a certain thing, a parasite scale. And I was like, what is this? And then I never went any further with it because I was like, I have no idea how to solve that problem. I'm just going to park that and just carry on. Then you've mentioned it, and I've heard it before with other people. Are you talking about like literal parasites coming out of you?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool. Do you
So
realize
when
like
you
I'm like trying to process that information. Other people are going to
so
be trying to process that information
shall we
as
get
well. So
graphic? Shall we get graphic?
if you want to, that's fine. I
When
think
I
I think
talk,
people need that clarity.
yeah, so when I talk to my clients about this, I say I have to warn them because it can be pretty freaky. So I just say to them, you need to be prepared. Like maybe when you go to the bathroom, there could be like a little dangly bit that you might need to get a little bit of a tissue and give it a little bit of a pull. Parasites can also be microscopic and you might not really
Right.
see. There are some people, I've seen this on Instagram, which is obviously the holy grail of information.
Yeah.
But I have seen people on Instagram encouraging people to defecate on like a paper plate and then get like a little, we would call it a society stick. I don't know what they call it here in the UK, but like a little wooden, food-based
Skewer
stick.
type thing. Yeah.
Skewers the word. And then like to actually just look around and see if they can find anything.
Wow.
There's an account I follow on Instagram that I think just makes all their money by selling the products, but she actually gets people to send photographs of their worms into the account and then she shares them every month. Like, these are the photographs of everybody's worms from the
Wow.
past month.
Okay.
So it's a real thing. It is a real thing. And I must say, I've worked with clients who've done the same parasite process and they've also really noticed a big difference after doing the full moon cleanse. And they've also had to, remove visible worms
Wow.
from their bowel movements. Yeah.
Okay. So as far as like the questions in my mind, but I'm going to ask you this so that other people understand
So
this.
many questions.
How did you get to understand? So that's in the book Toxic, right?
Oh
Is
no,
it?
that was just a completely different thing that I
That's
just
just
tried.
something you came across. Okay, cool. And
Yeah.
then how did it help you specifically? Like, what did you actually physically experience after doing your first one that was so different to how you were before?
Yeah, I think it's just a feeling of more energy, like more
Okay.
energy, greater mental clarity, and for me, the big one is being able to recover and tolerate exercise better. So
Okay.
one of the symptoms that bugged me the most was what we would call post-exertional malaise, which is
Mm,
an increase or a heightening in symptoms, anything from like directly after exercise, even 24, 48, 72 hours later.
mm,
So when I had fatigue, I would feel like, oh, I've got energy. Let me go and do a 20-minute workout. And then after that 20-minute workout, I'd just be in
you'd
pain.
crash.
I would have brain fog, which is completely crash. Yeah.
Okay.
So the big challenge is like I could do the workout. I physically had the energy to do it. I felt strong enough to do it and fit enough to do it.
Yeah.
But then afterwards, just massive payback
Bang
for
down.
doing it.
Okay. So, okay, cool. I feel like we probably need to come back to the whole parasite thing, maybe in another chat, but let me see
We
if it
can do
circles
that.
back around. It's interesting, and it's certainly something that I have considered in myself, for myself. But I think there's also that element of like, I'm not sure I want to open this tin right now.
You know, the way that I would actually describe it, like if you pass a worm and you know you've passed a worm, it's like the best and worst feeling at the same time. Like you're
Okay.
completely grossed out that this is the experience you're having, and also so delighted that it's no longer inside you. So,
Yeah.
yeah, that's the experience.
I have too many questions, but I'm going to pause there for a sec. So, going to the mold element, right?
Mm.
So, what were the symptoms what are your common classic symptoms of maybe a mold? So, people out there might go, do you know what? Actually, I've been living with mold. I mean, we've had issues with mold in our ensuite bathroom for a long time that I've been systematically dealing with in my own way, which normally involves me kind of like, cleaning things and stuff. What's the what's this kind of common thread that you'd say, right, okay, you need to get a mold test?
So I think the post-exertional malaise is a big one for
Okay.
molds, but there's lots of other symptoms. Like it can be headaches, it can be, brain fog, it can be neurological symptoms that have any other, like they don't have a diagnosable cause. People with molds may be more susceptible to histamine intolerance and mast cell activation syndrome, which, again, we could go on a whole tangent about that, but I'll just name drop for now. Chronic pain, digestive issues, sinus issues, coughing and wheezing, asthma
Right.
type issues. So there's a lot of mixed symptoms. It because it gets what happens is if you're living in a moldy home and the mold spores living in your home are producing toxins, and you're inhaling those toxins, and it's essentially poisoning your body. They
Hmm.
even say that mold exposure is synonymous, it's very similar to even having a mild brain injury. So
Yeah.
it can affect your mood, it can affect your cognitive function. But if you live in a moldy home for a long period of time, the mold spores can become airborne. You breathe them in through your nasal passages, your lungs, they get into your gut, and then they colonize your body. Then
Okay.
you become the moldy home. And so then we have two issues. We have the fact that now these organisms are living in your body, and we have to actually address that and kill those off. And also the parasites will kind of also like accumulate a lot of mold in them because they're obviously eating bacteria and stuff that are in your gut. And then so the whole system is just basically becoming more and more toxic, and that's
Okay.
overloading for your liver, and then that can cause a lot of problems.
Okay. So, I mean, say someone doesn't have the resources to maybe go and do the lab testing, are there things that people can do to prevent or to reduce the amount of, obviously removing the mold, but is it airing out rooms better?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So,
So like the first step is just mold avoidance. And you know, that can be really tricky if it's like in your home and there's a lot of issues. So like if people have the budget, like a proper renovation project to properly remove the damp and make sure that everything is sort of dry and secure long term is the ideal. But otherwise, things like ventilating, using air filters. Sometimes I recommend to clients that they can get an essential oil diffuser, because the essential oils will have antimicrobial properties, and if you're diffusing them in the air, that can kill off airborne mold spores.
we've got
Just
tons
making
of that.
Yeah,
It's
just
like it's
making
like
sure like things are
yeah.
clean. Like wash your shower curtain if you have one, wash your bath mats regularly, wash your pillowcases regularly,
Mm,
vacuum regularly because the mold spores get stuck in dust. So
gotcha.
ideally with a HEPA filter vacuum cleaner. Yeah, just keep things as clean as possible and air as much as possible. Keep humidity down and as dry as possible.
Okay, cool. I have a question I need to write down. Okay.
And
So
while you're writing down your question, also say mold avoidance in food. So watching like grains are
yeah.
typically contaminated with mold, obviously alcohol, certain fruits tend to
Mm.
have more mold, like grapes, for example. So, and people can go on my website. I'm actually ranked #1 in Google for mold illness diet. So if you
Wow.
Google mold illness diet, you can see my blog will come up, and you'll find
Nice.
a list of like what foods are better and what foods are worse for you.
Yeah, I'm like super jealous of the amount of information that you, A, as a person contain, and B, I'm jealous of how you run your courses and your whole process of like documenting things. And it's very methodical, and it's a good way of you're kind of collecting information in a way that is so good for people who are coming across what you do. I actually learn a lot from you, so thank you for that, because I watch how you deal with your emails and your I am part of your emails, and I click on things because I want to see what happens next. So I to be
That's
truthful,
such a
right?
compliment.
Okay, so I want to see what happens next. And also, there are considerations, there are elements we've spoken. You've helped me with some testing recently, which was helpful. So, there are things that I am considering myself. But okay, so enter functional patterns, right? Because I feel like I want to bring that up. And
Taken like 45 minutes to drop functional patterns in.
that's fine. It's cool. I need to know, like, I think people need to hear that there's other people out there, particularly because what they'll see on Instagram and what they see with functional patterns is there's two different approaches. I think like the marketing is quite heavy, and it's weighted.
Aggressive, I would say.
Aggressive, yeah. I mean, look, I get it, and that's because I drank all the Kool-Aid like many years ago now. And and the frustrations that I see them sharing are their own. I can share some of those frustrations myself with the way that the fitness industry works. But on a basis of things, you were the last person that I thought would ever drop into my direct messages about having some help with training. And when you did contact me, I was like, wow. Firstly, I was flattered. Secondly, I felt like instantaneous pressure. I was like, oh shit. So what led you to that point? And then I'll ask you how it's been. So
Oh, I feel very touched that that's how you felt. But what really happened was that the client I've worked with for years, kind of like on and off, and she initially was in my like weight loss group back in 2014 when I first took my business online. Then more recently, we did some one-on-one work, just more sort of health and hormones and skin and gut issues. And, she's just sort of following my journey on Instagram, and she reached out to me and she said, I've been doing this thing, and I just feel that you need to know about it. And she told me a little bit about functional patterns, and it piqued my interest for some reason. And I Googled it. And I Googled functional patterns near me, or whatever someone will put into Google. And I could see there are a few options locally to me, but I just, for whatever reason, it didn't feel right to like investigate further. And then I think you posted a video on Facebook, maybe of yourself doing something. And I realized that you were
yeah.
a functional patterns practitioner. So the marketing works. And and at that point in time, I knew, obviously, because I'd interviewed you on the podcast before, and I know Kate quite well. Instantly, I knew that if I was going to do this, you would be someone I could trust.
Mm,
And that was really important to me, given the health journey that I had been on.
okay.
So that's, I think, when I reached out to you, and I was like,
Cool.
I'm curious about this.
Yeah. It was good. Pause there for there, you're back. Never mind. It's me. It's probably me. I think it is me. My internet is being a bit weird. Sorry about
Did you
that.
get all the audio?
I got all the audio. It's just the
You're just
video
looking a
cut.
little bit blurry. Yeah.
Yeah. So okay. So FP, you started working with me on the fundamental program, which is essentially just dialing into the 10-week online course and going through some of the stuff from there. What's your biggest takeaway from it? I know you entered with shoulder problems, which, you know, I know has it's helped, but like your approach was very conservative in the sense that you didn't want to overload your body. And I said, well, then this is kind of perfect, really, because it's a very slow moving target, let's say. So
Yeah.
what was the biggest shift for you with that in terms of your learnings so far?
Gosh, there's just been so much. I think maybe if we backtrack a little bit and say, I think we had like an initial assessment together, and like I
Mm,
wanted to do it with you, but I also had fear because I was so used to like I had previously, let's talk about pre-illness, just like trained in a very different way. And illness took that all away from me. And then I had just got back into training in the gym and kind of getting back to what I had done before, which was kind of more like bodybuilding style weightlifting. And now you were telling me I had to stop that and do something new. And so there was obviously like a fear, like I had all of this, it was taken away. Now I've got it back, but now it feels like it's getting taken away again. So
mm,
there was a big psychological mental shift that needed to happen, but I was in pain. And you you probably know that like people in pain are the easiest people to sell to because they are just so desperate for relief and for solutions. And I think that was just the driving factor. I remember one day going to the gym and my neck and my shoulders were just in so much pain, and I was lying on the floor in between sets, not in tears from the pain, but almost in tears just from the emotion of the like this constant ache. Just
mm,
this has been going on for so long, and I remember thinking to myself, I don't want to be in pain anymore. Like that was, I was almost crying, just lying there in between sets, just going like, I just don't want to do it like this anymore. And I knew that something had to change.
mm.
But when we started, it was, I remember you made me do a plank, and it was the hardest plank I've ever done in my life. That was like the whole session, like just a bit of standing, just a bit of like chatting. Okay, do a plank, done. But it was the hardest plank ever.
Mm.
And I think it was just this idea, I guess, of quality over quantity. And for so long, it was like more volume, heavier weights, do more, push more, achieve more, which is just the pattern of my entire life, pretty much. And this was like, do less, but just do it really, 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 really well.
Yeah.
And that appealed to me because it was also kind of what I've been working on in life with my business. I mean, you've been so kind about, how I've set things up. And, that's sort of also with business. Before I was ill, everything was so crazy. And now it's really about simplicity and taking your time and doing things well and setting up systems that are strong and stable and foundational on which you can build. And
Mm.
that's what I feel like the functional patterns is. And I said to you, I almost wish I'd had it when I was ready to exercise after my illness, because I could have set myself up in a different way, but that wasn't how it worked out.
Mm.
But it's this idea of quality over quantity. And sometimes I'll go to the gym and I'll do the exercises I'm supposed to be doing, and I'm just like, I'm exhausted, but it's not the same type of exhaustion that used to be like pushing yourself so your heart rate is like maxed out and you're just like full of lactic acid and you're like dead.
Yeah.
It's just this, it's a different type of exhaustion, which I think is much better for managing like my nervous system and managing the inflammatory load in my body.
Yeah. It's awesome to hear that because I think a lot of people will resonate with that if they've done functional patterns to any degree, and B, it's almost a relief for people in a big psychological way. And having transitioned from being a personal trainer to that was a huge shift. And I knew when I did the 10-week course and I'd been working with my practitioner, and then I did the Human Foundations course with them, there were people in there and I could see them, like the cogs were just turning, and they're like, how do I monetize this because of what I currently do? And if I do this, it directly throws all my business, like that, my current business strategy, in the bin. And I'd say over the last 3 years, I've been trying to work that one out, because I went from hammering people, like just trying to kill them, to trying to help them. And the intensity with so I had to have a lot of my clients had to trust me. And I remember saying, this is what's going to happen, and this is the date that it's going to happen, to everybody. So this was back when, before I met, well, we worked together. I said, on this date, this is happening. You're either in with me for the next 12 months or you're out. And
Which
I
is so
remember,
courageous.
and I was like, I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm so screwed if this all goes wrong. And do you know what? The retention was actually really astounding. People stayed, and I said to one of my guys, I was like, Jeremy, why did you, like, what were you thinking, like, when I first started doing this? Because now he's like, his shoulders are great and his core is doing really well, and he's like, I'm the strongest I've ever been, but I don't feel like I've packed on a huge amount of muscle. And that was a positive thing for him. And I said, what were you thinking, like, when I first came out with this, and I just took everything away from you, like all your training, cross trainer, rowing machine, all this stuff. And he was like, quite honestly, Brendan, I thought you were crazy. And he was like,
But
I
he
thought you were
trusted you
mad.
enough to stay.
But I thought, hey, let's give this 3 months and see what happens. And he said it was the best thing he ever did. And that's great to hear when people say that. But at the same time, I take a lot of responsibility on when I start with someone, as I'm sure you do with your clients.
Absolutely.
So with that in mind, you've said it shifted your perspective of how you were training in terms of quality over quantity. Has it changed any other aspects of the way you think about life and maybe dealing with problems?
What I would say, and this, I'm not really prepared to answer this, so it's kind of like on the fly, but I felt like because I started holding my body differently, there was a shift in my nervous system.
Mm,
And to say here as well, I've been studying for the past 3 years to be a somatic experiencing practitioner. And so I'm very interested in the nervous system. And a lot of the work I've been doing across the past 3 years has been learning how to work with the nervous system. So I'm kind of very in tune with my nervous system. And there was just a sense of greater resilience and greater strength, not physical strength, like I'm going to go pick up that 20-kilo boulder or whatever, but on a
mm,
sense of strength on a nervous system level. It just felt like something was shifting inside of me, which is very complementary to everything else that I
good.
was doing. And yeah, I think it's like, we hold our body in certain ways because of the experiences that we've had, and because of the fight or flight responses that are trapped in the body that have not been able to complete what they needed to complete at the time.
Mm,
And that can shape the body and how it moves. And I think all the nervous system work in combination with the functional patterns has been very, very complementary and supportive. Yeah, for
good.
sure.
That's awesome to hear. How much time have you got, by the way? Because,
I've got loads of time. I do need to, if I could have a quick wee, that would be great, because I was drinking
yeah,
all this water.
no problem. You crack on.
Let me
That's fine. There we go. So, somatic, can you explain the somatic practitioner side things? Because, like, I know that is me fumbling through words because I couldn't remember the middle word. Somatic experience.
experiencing
Okay,
experiencing
somatic
yeah.
experiencing practitioner. So, yeah, I'm just going to let you talk about that because my level of knowledge about this is probably like, I know the word.
Yeah, no,
Um,
that's fine. So I guess it's a what we would maybe call like a mind body therapy, which is created by Peter Levine. He's
okay.
got several books. I recommend Waking the Tiger or In an Unspoken Voice are the two that I've read. And if people want to read more about it, that's a good place to start. But it's all based on his observation that, animals in the wild, despite being in life-threatening situations almost every single day, don't demonstrate the effects of trauma that humans do. So, they don't have PTSD. It might be different for domestic animals, but, wild animals typically
Mm,
don't display those kind of trauma symptoms. And one of the reasons being is they move through what we call a threat response cycle. So when somebody experiences this a threat, there might be like a stop, an orient to where the danger is, sense into the danger. Then your nervous system mobilizes energy to initiate fight or flight. You might run away. You might create a fighting action. If it's too much, you might go into freeze and wait until the danger passes. Then the freeze dissolves, the animal might shake or discharge in some way, and then they go back to a resting state. And so
Gotcha.
there's a cycle that needs to happen. But as human beings in modern day life, we're exposed to a lot of abstract stresses where we're not conscious of the cycles happening. Or in certain situations, specific situations, whether it's a surgery or a car accident or maybe like an attack or something like that, something tried to happen, but it couldn't complete the cycle. So what essentially happens is all that mobilized energy of the fight or flight sympathetic nervous system it's like all dressed up and nowhere to go in the body. And if the cycle can't complete, where does that energy go? It stays stuck in your fascia or in the tissues or in muscle tension, all the different kind of little places in the body where we can hold on to that energy. And so the somatic experiencing is helping people to find ways to complete those cycles and discharge the energy so it's no longer held in the body.
Gotcha. So what does a somatic experience encompass? Like, how does that work?
Yeah, so we work with 5 channels of communication, which we call the CYBAM. And so CYBAM stands for sensation. So we work with sensations, the felt sense in the body, images, behavior, which might be gestures or movements, affect, which is emotion, and then the M of CYBAM is meaning. So when you go to a talk therapy, counseling, psychotherapy, you're always on the meaning channel. You're just talking about what happened. What we might do in a somatic experiencing session is there's like a little bit of dialogue to connect with the content, but then we're looking at what is the body experiencing? What are the sensations in the body as you experience this? What are the emotions? Is there an image that comes with it? Is there a movement your body wants to make? And it's about re-establishing healthy connections in all the channels so that the experience can be fully processed and whatever needs to happen can happen so that the survival energy can be discharged. And that's the physical experience. It might be experienced as shaking. It might be experienced as suddenly getting very flushed with heat or suddenly getting very cold. Sometimes I burp a lot. So sometimes when I'm processing energy, I just burp. Sometimes, when your stomach goes when you're relaxing, that's also a sign of discharge. So some people will cry. So there's lots of different ways in which we discharge, and that's essentially what we're looking for. Is the discharge is a sign that survival energy is leaving the body.
Wow. Okay. So that sounds along the lines of, it sounds along the lines of what how I think and how I thought leading into, say, doing functional patterns, reading into Robert Sapolsky, who you may or may not have come across, but he wrote the book Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers, or for people in America, Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. And essentially it's talking about the way that humans have responded to stimulus, really, I suppose, and how we've removed ourselves from sort of a more natural approach to dealing with things. So we talk about it with our dog all the time, because if you put her in a harness and she goes for a walk, she is like ready to go. She's like, woohoo. And then if she comes back, anything that happens on the walk, like let's say, for example, she comes across another dog and then there's a moment of, well, I'm going to sniff and then I'm going to like circle, and then maybe this is intimidating, maybe it's not, maybe it's really exciting. The reaction is very like you visible in the body language. And then if it's been too exciting, we've learned from our dog trainer to put her back on the lead. And as soon as you put that little clip on to the back of her harness, she stops and she shakes, and then
Discharges.
she just carries on. And it's that stress response, right? It's like, cool, that is gone. This is now. Let's go.
Yeah. Yeah, she's just completing a cycle.
She's completing her cycle, right? So, and I understand that from seeing it, but a lot of people will be like, that's weird. Or maybe they don't even notice it. But if you have, like, let's say, when you said about domestic animals, if you have an abused dog or something like that, they learn the behaviors and then it manifests in the body language, right? So you could see a
And it's the
dog that
same for
shies.
humans.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
And I've always found confidence for me has been one of the biggest things. I think someone I once worked with talked about my chakra being blocked in my throat or something like that. Hence, I've got all this like, ah. And so I guess there's different sort of takes on it. I guess some people talk about chakras, some people talk about all sorts of things. I think I still lean quite heavily into the biomechanical side just because I don't know why. Maybe it's just my experience, but that's interesting. And so I guess your process of taking that on board was not to specifically deal just with that. It's to complement everything else you do, right? So it's like a
Yeah.
tool in your toolbox. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, from a fatigue perspective, if we think about all of that, we talked about that survival energy, all dressed up, nowhere to go. It takes a lot of energy to contain it all the time. Gabor Mate, have you heard of him? Yeah,
Yeah,
he's
yeah.
awesome. Yeah, so Gabor Mate talks about this idea of like a beach ball, like a blown up beach ball. And if you were to hold that beach ball underneath the water, just to contain it and keep pushing it down and just hold it there, it would take like huge, huge, huge amounts of energy to sustain that. And it's
Mm,
the same with our emotions as human beings. Like I grew up in a family that didn't do emotions. And so
right.
everything is kind of like you learn to like push everything
Suppress
down.
everything. Yeah.
And so you develop that as a coping mechanism across a lifetime. That's a lot of unprocessed emotion that you're holding in. And that can be very, very tiring for the body.
Yeah.
So, from a fatigue perspective, learning to have, I think about it as learning to rebuild the connections within the system. We've cut things off and shut things down and compartmentalized to cope. And part of the somatic experiencing is to bring more coherence and connection and reorganizing back to the system, which is
Mm,
what functional patterns does as well, because it's
mm.
about getting all the different muscles to work together when you're doing a movement, not just the bicep curl, or the leg
Exactly.
extension or
Yeah.
whatever it might be.
Yeah, it's sort of that integrated approach rather than an isolated way of dealing with things. And I think so, for example, to talk about your testing, you've talked about tests, and I know you've got like you've recommended Medichecks to me. I spoke to and speak to some doctors on a regular basis, and they're very well established in the medical world here. Um, and I mentioned the test that we did, which was the cortisol awakening response, right? The Dutch test. And when I mentioned it, I was talking about it and I was talking to someone who knows what they know. And as soon as I said those words, it was like, what a load of crap. And I was like, okay. And I kind of felt like really embarrassed, because I talked about it
I'm
quite
sure.
freely. And I was like, okay, so are you telling me? So on one hand, I'm being told like this is something to look at. And on another hand, the results don't matter. And because I had the results at the time, and it was like, it was kind of embarrassing. And then a couple of days later, I got a message from that person, and I was like, it completely caught me off guard. And it was like, I've been doing some reading into this, and actually, that's a really cool way of testing for cortisol awakening response. And I was like, I would have thought so, because the Dutch test and the Dutch that company is not just going to be founded out of nothing. It's not going to be a
Yeah, they're
scam.
pretty
It's
world renowned.
yeah, they're
So,
they're pretty they're pretty hefty, and the results of it were quite interesting, right? So I guess what I'm trying to say here is if you do test for things, you're going to find stuff, right? How do you help people cope with that information? Because I feel like sometimes, and this is myself included, too much information can be negative and have a negative impact on someone. So like how do you balance that out with people that have got Google at their fingertips and think that everything's wrong with them when, you know, like, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm still learning. I think I've in the past definitely overwhelmed my clients by almost knowing too much and then giving too much information. And then they're just
Mm,
like, oh, it's just too much. And people can get very anxious about their health as well. So I've definitely made that mistake. I also think that's why people invest in the services that I offer, is because I can filter some of that for them and be like, in my experience, this is what I think would be helpful for you to focus on. And then we can see how you go and then maybe look at that stuff. But for now, let's just focus on this.
mm,
And so I think that's where it can be helpful to like work with someone who has expertise, because otherwise, yeah, you can just have too much information and, you know, test too many things and worry that everything is a problem and never get anywhere because you're trying to
mm.
deal with too many things at once.
Information paralysis or whatever it's called.
Yeah,
So like
paralysis analysis, I think.
that's it, paralysis
Yeah.
analysis. Yeah. So like I'm trying to understand everything and it's like, well, actually, if you spent more time doing something, even if it's just one thing and you gave your all to that, it would help quite a lot because it's going to help give you that confidence to take the next step, so on and so forth. So
Yeah.
I'm conscious of keeping you too long, but I thought what would be really cool, because I'm aware that you're very academic in many respects. You've got a lot of knowledge and a lot of experience in helping people. At the same time, there are probably going to be people watching and listening to this that are like brand new to everything, functional patterns, me, you. What would you sum up, if you could, into like a few words or maybe a sentence or maybe some bullet points as to what people could do from a starting point if they're feeling tired and stressed and anxious, like, and in pain maybe? What would you kind of advise them to go away and do just for a daily routine?
Yeah.
So
So, I mean, I say this all the time to my clients, is often we think of these chronic issues as being like really complicated. Like, we think we've got a complex illness or a complex problem, and therefore we need complex solutions. But actually, that's not true. Coming back to the basics can be incredibly powerful. So I think I always talk about this idea of stabilizing. Very often when these patterns are showing up, whether it's chronic pain or mood disorders or chronic fatigue, it's a pattern that has been developing for a very long time as a coping mechanism for all the undischarged stress in the system. And as the body kind of tries to find a way to cope, it becomes very disorganized
mm,
and it becomes very unstable as a consequence of that disorganization. So what we need first and foremost is like to ask ourselves, like, what are the things that are going to help you feel more stable in your life? And it's probably going to be things like a stable routine. You wake up at the same time each day. You get sunlight on your eyes. You go to sleep at the same time each night. You sleep properly. Stable blood sugar, which I'm a big fan of. So eating well enough, as well as you can with the resources that you have, to keep your blood sugar stable throughout the day, because every time your blood sugar is going up and down, that's destabilizing for your system. Reduce like stimulation and stress. So, what are the things that you're doing in your life which are overstimulating you, whether that's staying up too late watching Netflix or scrolling on Instagram or watching too many YouTube videos, or whatever it is. And get outside more, be in nature more, have things that you do that enable you to down regulate your
mhm.
system. I'd say those would be some of the top picks.
Okay, cool. And from a dietary perspective, there's tons of information out there. The basics with that for people that you think, because you've got vegans, carnivores,
Yeah.
there's going to be a war at
So
some point.
this is very controversial, but in my business, we don't work with vegans.
Okay.
And we only work with people who prepared to eat fish, eggs, at least, and obviously meat if they can. It's really hard to stabilize your blood sugar and get the nutrients you need on a vegan diet. So
Yeah.
some people might not like me saying that, but that is my stance. In terms of, apart from that, I think generally speaking, like whatever helps you stabilize your blood sugar, which is for the most people in this day and age, unless they're very active, probably on the lower carb end of the scale. I'm a big fan of the ketogenic diet. It's the diet I follow for myself. Does everybody need to be doing it? I don't know. But I tend to be non-dogmatic in the sense that I don't believe in this one thing for everyone. I believe in personalization. But I think like unprocessed food, stable blood sugar, enough protein in your diet are good places to start.
Yeah. No, I think that's interesting. I mean, I was a vegan for a year, and that was not great. And it was purely out of guilt, I think, initially. And then it turned into a very toxic culture, I found, which was, that's not putting all vegans in one boat. I know there's probably plenty of vegans out there that are lovely people, but in particular, I just found it to be a very negative space, and it wasn't good for my body percentage, my percentages of body fat. Like my whole body just went nope, 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 nope. So no, I agree. I kind of agree with you, but non-dogmatic. I've tried all sorts of things, and I kind of sort of lean back to where you are with that. But that's helpful for people, I think, is that regulation side of things. Is there anything that you want to bring up, like in terms of your business and how people can work with you? What kind of, I know that you're hiring as well at the moment, so that's positive because it means there's more scope to work under your watchful eye, as it were. What kind of things are happening at the moment?
So I think maybe worth mentioning, I do have a podcast. We've touched on so many different topics today, and we can only kind of touch on everything a little bit based on the nature of the conversation. But if there's anything people want to learn a little bit more about, I have a podcast, which is the Chronic Fatigue and Burnout Recovery podcast. If you just Google Anna Marsh podcast, you may come up with it as well. And it's on Spotify and my website and all of those places. So that's a really nice place for people to get free information, which is always helpful, although too much free information can also cause its own problems. And then in my business, obviously started out with just me working one-on-one with clients. As time has gone on, I've been so blessed to have so many people who are interested in working with me. So I'm gradually building out more of a practitioner team where there are other people who are working with the business's clients, but I'm overseeing all of those cases as well. So it's an opportunity actually for you to get a couple of people looking at your case, and if you feel like you need more help.
Cool. Just reach out. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for that. And I guarantee that there'll be another one of these, because there's a lot of stuff here that I'm like, I need to think about that. I need to go away and read about that. Maybe I need to do a parasite doodah. Maybe that's too far. Maybe I'll start with the mold thing first and then move on to that. I don't know.
Yeah.
We'll
Well,
see.
there's loads of resources on my website about the mold if you want to read a little bit more about that. As I said, #1 in Google for mold illness diet. But it's always such a pleasure talking to you, Brendan. Usually when we have our functional pattern sessions, you do a lot of one-way talking at us, but it's always nice just to have this two-way dialogue as well.
No, it's great. And it helps me frame some things as well, because I know now that there are things that you can do. But cool. Thank you so much. And thank you everybody for tuning in. Shoot your questions over to Anna and have a great time.
Thank you.